Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment from our webinar series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. How can you make sustainability claims about your products and avoid greenwashing? Learn how trans-Tasman hygiene company Essity, formerly Asaleo Care, uses credible environmental data from life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations to design and market its products. Join Rochelle Lake, Essity's Head of Marketing, and Anne Lindsay, Marketing Manager, to hear how the manufacturer uses sustainability tools to make decisions and why it includes verified information that EPDs contain in its advertising. Our Technical Director Jeff Vickers joins Rochelle and Anne for this webinar. Jeff will explain how LCAs and EPDs measure the environmental impacts of your product's life cycle. Here's a sneak preview.
You should also avoid broad or unqualified claims. And so claims like, my product's sustainable, my product's green, my product's environmentally friendly, those kinds of claims are particularly problematic because they're very, very hard to justify. I'd also strongly recommend that you talk about the benefits of your product rather than the problems with someone else's. So it's very, very easy to want to say, hey, our product's the best on the market, everyone else's product is junk, our thing's very sustainable and theirs isn't. Unless you've got really rock solid evidence to back that up, I wouldn't recommend it, and it can get you into a lot of trouble.
And talking specifically at our products, our tissue products, things like packaging, it's less than 3% of our total footprint. And there's a lot of focus on packaging, but actually for our products, that is absolutely not the main game. Even things like transport. I was just reviewing our EPDs this morning before coming on board to look at the transportation, and that's about 2% of our environmental footprint. So people making claims around we've offset our transport or what have you, again, for products like ours, that is really not what's going to make a difference. And Jeff, you were talking about the legal requirements around that. You're kind of making a big deal about something that's not a big deal. So again, that's kind of greenwashing.
Understanding our whole life cycle. So on that slide that Rochelle opened with, we had the image on the toilet roll. So it's almost what we call from forest to flush across our whole life cycle, that we know from our cradle to gate, so from the forest to our store gate or to store, that we've actually got a negative carbon footprint. So we do have a very unique footprint in the fact with the local geothermal steam in our manufacturing process, and then using gold standard FSC pulp and the likes.
With that, let's get started.
So welcome everyone to today's webinar, using sustainability data to tell your story. I'm delighted to be joined today by Rochelle Lake and Anne Lindsay of Essity. So thank you both for joining us today. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, welcome. For those of you who are joining us again, welcome back. We're going to be taking you through some insights from these two experts in the next 30 minutes, and we'll have time for questions at the end. If you don't know thinkstep-anz, we're a sustainability advisory firm. We work with companies large and small across Australia and New Zealand to help and deliver sustainability strategy. We work particularly around sustainability data and trying to quantify sustainability, producing things like life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations. If you don't know Essity, I'm sure you know their brands. So they produce the Talk, Tenor and Libra brands, and across Australia and New Zealand. And in New Zealand, they produce also consumer tissue brands such as Purex, Sorbent and Handy. And we're going to hear from both parts of the business today. Okay, so before we begin and before I hand over, I want to just do a few do's and don'ts and talk through some of my advice for companies who are wanting to communicate sustainability data. So for those of you who may have seen this, and particularly for those of you that haven't, in March of this year, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission published an investigation into 247 brands that were making claims online in relation to sustainability. And a key finding from that was that 57% raised concerns. So more than half of the claims that were being made raised concerns. Key issues that the ACCC identified were vague claims, claims that were supported by insufficient evidence, setting goals without any plan to achieve them. So, hey, we're going to decarbonize massively by 2050, but we have no plan of getting there. And also, and importantly, the use of third-party certifications in a way that was confusing or misleading. And so, yes, it's good to have third-party certification, but you do also have to use it appropriately. So it's just something to be conscious of. They've subsequently followed up with some advice, and they set out a series of key things that they recommend as good practice. And I think this is as applicable in New Zealand as it is in Australia. So the first point, and perhaps the most important, is make claims that are accurate. May seem obvious, but make claims that are accurate, have evidence to support those claims. Don't hide important facts. So if you're product performs particularly well in some area, or it's particularly good, but it only applies to 1% of the products that you sell, perhaps that's not the sort of thing you want to rest your hat on, and maybe you should make it clear that the other 99% of products it doesn't apply to. If there are conditions that apply to a claim, so it's conditional on a product being used in a certain way, or a product being disposed of in a certain way, or a particular retailer selling a particular product, or anything else, then you need to explain those conditions. You should also avoid broad or unqualified claims. And so claims like, my product's sustainable, my product's green, my product's environmentally friendly, those kinds of claims are particularly problematic because they're very, very hard to justify. And I'm going to cover a little bit more about that as I progress with my slides, but just to sort of say anything that's really vague and sort of overarching, I know it's a nice and easy to use message, but it's not going to particularly land well with competition authorities. Please also use easy to understand language, so avoid technical jargon, avoid misleading visual elements, and in the case particularly for companies that are really going to struggle to achieve lower carbon or more sustainable outcomes in the short term, be honest about it. So if you're in a hard to abate sector like the cement industry or the steel industry or plastic sector or wherever, and you recognize that you need fundamental transitions in technology to be able to achieve your goals, just say it. Just come out and say, like, we recognize sustainability is hard. It's going to be a journey. We're all on the journey together. We're doing the bits that we can now, and we're looking to the future to kind of do what we do more in the 2040s or whenever the technology is perceived to be available. So I think it's important just to be honest about some of the things you can and can't do. So in terms of the advice that I give, so when I'm advising clients, these are the kinds of things I typically say. The first thing is be specific. If your product has more recyclable packaging, which is one of the examples we're going to discuss today, say that. If your product's using more renewable energy, say that. If your product has a lower carbon footprint than your previous product generation, say that. But don't say things like our product is sustainable, it's environmentally friendly, it's green, when you're basing that on one or two attributes. Just be as specific as you can, because it's always going to be the clearest and least misleading claim that you can make. I'd also strongly recommend that you talk about the benefits of your product rather than the problems with someone else's. So it's very, very easy to want to say, hey, our product's the best on the market, everyone else's product is junk, our thing's very sustainable and theirs isn't. Unless you've got really rock solid evidence to back that up, I wouldn't recommend it, and it can get you into a lot of trouble. I'm currently involved as an expert witness in a court case on that particular area. I would not recommend making comparative claims that you can't back up, because it is very, very difficult to sort of justify that, and it becomes very expensive very quickly. As I mentioned before, please don't claim a product is sustainable. There are some standards which say that you can't. We don't even know what sustainability means, or how, in terms of the context of a product. Sustainability as a concept, in my opinion, it applies best to people. It applies best to our interactions with the natural world. But when it comes to a product, no product is sustainable, really, when you look at it in isolation, because how many are you making? If you're just making 5, probably anything's sustainable. If you're making 5 billion, probably most things aren't. And so it all depends on the context of what you're talking about. So we need to be putting products in context, and really, in my opinion, at least, sustainability is a term better applied to people and people in nature, rather than products as it's sort of inanimate objects. Also, just be conscious of claiming that your product is greener than another product. As I mentioned before, if you do that, you really do need a lot of evidence to be able to back that up. In terms of labeling and what you declare, I just wanted to talk through the 3 main types of labeling, the three main types of kind of claim or evidence that you can use to support a claim. So in the world of international standards, there are 3 standards. There's ISO 14021, which is for self-declared environmental claims, the claims you make yourself. There's also third-party eco-labels, which is ISO 14024, and there's something called environmental product declarations, or EPDs, which is ISO 14025. So I'm just going to talk through them each one at a time, and then I'm going to hand you over to Essity. So the first one is ISO 14021, which is about self-declared claims. And what this standard does is it gives guidance on common terms that you might want to use. So things like recycled content, whether something is compostable or not, whether it's got a longer life than normal, so an extended product life, whether you're using less energy than before, or other things. It provides definitions for those terms and how to use them. It also provides some general principles, and principles include things like an environmental claim that is vague or non-specific, which broadly implies that a product is environmentally beneficial, shall not be used. So making those vague claims, the same points that ACCC has picked up on, is really, really not encouraged. Similarly, you cannot claim that a product is sustainable. You can say that it is more sustainable, but just be careful saying that something is sustainable, it is green, it is kind of earth friendly, or whatever you want to use. It can be more or better than, or better than it was, but be very, very careful to avoid it is sustainable, because that's a challenging thing to measure and define. ISO 14024 defines what are commonly called eco labels, and I've just put a bunch of common examples on the right, things you might recognize, like FSC or PEFC certification, energy and water star ratings, MSC for seafood, organic certifications, things like Good Environmental Choice Australia and New Zealand. These eco labels provide and assess that a product's environmental attributes meet a certain threshold. So typically they're either calculating, what is your level of performance, and they're either reporting that directly, like an energy label, or they're saying you meet a certain threshold. You're either meeting a tick of compliance, you either comply or you don't, or you're meeting levels like gold, silver, and bronze. But effectively, these are the attributes that the eco label assesses. You are judged against them, and then you sort of see where you sit. Do you get the eco label or not? Do you get a better or worse version of that eco label? But effectively, it's a third-party assurance to define whether you're getting, a particular level of performance or not. I think the key thing to be aware of with eco labels is that there are a lot of them, and they can be a little bit confusing, and they're not always well understood depending on what they are. Some are better recognized than others, and I've tried to pick some of those examples on the right. But there's a site called ecolabelindex.com that tracks eco labels and has done for many years. It's currently tracking 456 different labels. There are lots of them. And there can be a bit of market confusion about what they all mean. And so I think it's really important in the context of you, your business, or the broader industry in which you're part of, to decide on what really matters and works for you. In the context of Essity, sustainable certification of their fiber is super important, and that's where things like FSC and PEFC come in. But in the context of other industries, that would be totally irrelevant. So it sort of depends on context as to what's relevant for you, and some eco labels are better understood than others. The final thing I wanted to talk about is environmental product declarations, and these are somewhat different to eco labels. They're often called or referred to as like a nutrition label for environmental data, but rather than providing things like rather than providing like the sodium content or the carbohydrates or fat, they're providing things like the environmental footprint. So they're saying your carbon footprint is this, your water footprint is this, you're producing this amount of waste or using this amount of energy. And so the key thing to understand with an EPD is that it's taking a holistic set of information, it's calculating what's called a life cycle assessment, it's presenting that information according to a set of rules, so a consistent set of rules, and it's designed to facilitate comparisons, so it enables you to compare one product with another, but it does not make those comparisons itself. Just like a nutrition label, it gives you data, the fat is this, the carbohydrates are that, the sodium is this, and then you're choosing whether from the perspective of you and your diet, is that acceptable or not. It's the same sort of thing with an EPD. It's saying, here's our carbon footprint, here's our water footprint, our energy intensity, everything else, and then as the customer, you can choose, do I think that's good or bad, and how does that look compared to a competitor who may make a similar product or a different product that meets a similar need. And so EPDs are there to provide that environmental data. They're also independently reviewed by a third party and verified and registered and publicly available. So similar to an eco label, but providing data rather than a tick of compliance, if that makes sense. With that, I'd like to hand over to Essity. So I want to introduce Rochelle Lake, who's the head of marketing business to business at Essity. And Rochelle's going to start talking us through some of what Essity's been working on. So over to you, Rochelle.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and great to be here today, joining you. We've definitely had a long association with thinkstep and life cycle analysis, so it's exciting to be part of your webinar here today. So what I wanted to just start off by talking about is what we've learned from using life cycle analysis for our products. So both Anne and I work in marketing, looking after products. So I guess we're really talking about product sustainability here. And this is something that our company Essity has been doing for many, many years. I started with the company 13 years ago, and they already had life cycle analysis thinking and databases in place. But we started here in this part of the world by looking at our products that we make in New Zealand, at Cara, which is in the Bay of Plenty, our tissue products, and doing a full life cycle analysis of those. And we wanted to do that for a number of different reasons. So the first thing that the life cycle analysis gives you is complete transparency across the full life cycle, the impact of your product across its full life cycle. And it gives you insights in where's what I always call the hot spots. So where do you have the most carbon impact or other types of environmental indicators? Where is the problem areas, or where's the areas for improvement? And without that information and data, you really don't know. You might be spending a lot of time and effort on trying to fix or reduce in this area, but it's actually really, when you look at the whole product life cycle, it's not very important. And talking specifically at our products, our tissue products, things like packaging, it's less than 3% of our total footprint. And there's a lot of focus on packaging, but actually for our products, that is absolutely not the main game. Even things like transport. I was just reviewing our EPDs this morning before coming on board to look at the transportation, and that's about 2% of our environmental footprint. So people making claims around we've offset our transport or what have you, again, for products like ours, that is really not what's going to make a difference. And Jeff, you were talking about the legal requirements around that. You're kind of making a big deal about something that's not a big deal. So again, that's kind of greenwashing. So we've been able to use that life cycle information to guide our focus areas and guide our decision making, because these days we don't want to make a decision on changing our products without understanding that environmental impact. We are obviously trying to reduce it, so what we need to see is that actually going to reduce it, and we don't want to introduce anything that's going to increase our impact. So it's really, really important for that. And a company like ours being very much focused on sustainability, we don't want to greenwash. We want to have very, very credible, transparent information for our customers that comes and is verified by third parties. So that is why we use life cycle analysis in our business. And, you know, one thing that I would like to say, and I don't know if it's controversial or not, but I honestly believe if you don't do life cycle analysis when it comes to products, you're really not serious about sustainability, is kind of my opinion, having worked in this space for a long time. Okay, so let's have a look at some very specific examples of some of the work that we have done. So through our EPD work, and we're now actually on our third round of doing EPDs, if I take an example of hand towels, so we make hand towels that go into bathrooms in commercial businesses, schools, airports, whatever it might be. So we found out the very surprising statistic that 57% of the carbon emissions from hand towels came from landfill. So we thought, wow, that was our biggest hotspot. What can we do to try to improve that impact across the product life cycle? And so what we did the second time around that we did our EPD was to look at if we were to compost that hand towel, what impact would that have? And it actually showed that there would be a 50% carbon footprint reduction if you composted that hand towel rather than sending it to landfill. So if you just click on the next one, so that was a big insight for us to go, well, the biggest impact we can make is actually what our customers do at the end of life. So we took the action to actually get our hand towels composting certified, independently certified, to say that they could go into industrial composting facilities to give our customers the confidence they could do that. So a big part of what we communicate to customers is all of these facts, and we give them the tools and information around enabling them to help compost their hand towels. So it's easier to set up in your bathroom with 2 different bins and get collection and stuff set up. So that's what we promote with our hand towels. But then if we look at what else can we do with the data, so other things that we do, and I work in the B2B space, as Jeff said, and a big trend that is happening with a lot of our organisations is they're setting sustainability goals and targets. And the most common sustainability goals and targets that organisations have is in relation to climate and carbon footprint reductions. And our products fit into what's called the Scope 3 carbon emissions. So as more and more customers set goals and they have goals around Scope 3 carbon emissions, they're going to want to know what's the footprint or the emissions associated with their products. And EPDs 100% give you that. I'm not quite sure how you could be able to give Scope 3 data to a customer without an EPD, really. So we see that as an emerging thing and something that is absolutely only going to increase for the future. And the other key thing that we claim with our customers is renewable energy. So we've got products that are made in New Zealand in a geothermal region, and we've got the New Zealand electricity grid. So we've got an amazing amount of renewable energy in our products, and the EPD gives us the data to be able to factually claim how much renewable energy is in our products. So that's a couple of examples from the B2B side of things of how we've been using life cycle analysis and EPDs. Over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Rochelle. Well, very similar to what happened in the B2B space, we identified a hotspot using with our handy paper towel on how the way that shoppers or consumers actually dispose of the paper towel once they've used it. So it was really important for us to also gain home composting certification to really reduce that climate impact. So obviously that was quite a long-winded certification process. We then managed to be able to put a front of pack claim on there and support that with further back of pack copy, where we could actually verify that by actually placing your used paper towel where possible in a worm bin or a home composting bin actually decreases the carbon emissions that would be generated if disposed to landfill. So a real powerful statement, and obviously something we can verify. We've managed to also utilise our home composting certification on TV commercials, in store with Flanner or Fin campaigns, through Facebook, through Instagram, using influencers to also highlight this key component. And we do actually complete brand health tracking. So we have seen environmental attribute gains in our brand health tracking. So shoppers are actually really appreciating this move in the space. Another key claim that we talk through as well is a low carbon footprint. Now, again, this is across our 3 brands that we actually make in the Cowrail mill, so Sorbent and Purex toilet paper and also Handy paper towel as well. What we do understand through our life cycle assessment is if we've actually got a negative carbon footprint from cradle to gate. But what we can't 100% confirm is what shoppers then do once they've used the product. Obviously, toilet paper, it's usually flushed. Paper towel, it could end up in landfill if it's been used with chemicals. It could end up with home composting as such. But what we've chosen to claim is a low carbon footprint because we can actually verify across the manufacturing life cycle from forest to store that we do have that as low. As I mentioned, it's actually a negative carbon footprint, but a negative is a positive. So that just gets confusing right from the get-go. So again, we've stuck with just the key easy claim of low carbon footprint that we can verify through on packaging, through key claims. And with Purex, if we click again, we'll make Rolly walk around. We actually call it a low carbon paw print. Is the way we bring that alive with our storytelling. Thank you. And then another key project, really, this is a really great case study to identify how LCAs really gave us direction in reducing our packaging carbon footprint, is we had a project that really wanted to identify what was the sustainable packaging route for us to go down, what was the direction. Similar to Rochelle, packaging is not a huge part of our product's environmental footprint. It sits at just under 10%, but we know that shoppers really are concerned about waste associated with plastic packaging. We'd get a lot of queries through our consumer care line saying, hey, you make paper products, why don't you wrap it in paper packaging? But what we could actually identify through research and trials across various substrates and then comparing it through different LCAs is actually that the packaging direction that we needed to go through was PCR, so post-consumer recycled, so having resin in there that had come from a previous plastic life. And in 2021, we managed to launch 20% PCR, and this year we're currently transitioning out to a 30% PCR across all 3 brands. And that really is saving 60 tonne of virgin plastic each year if we had just stuck with the traditional virgin plastic. So really, some great examples of where a huge project actually helped with the investment and that key direction for us to build on. So by using LCAs in our thinking and across our product design, we are developing products whose environmental impacts are continually decreasing.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you, Rochelle. We're just going to open up for questions now. So I'm just going to bring up the questions that we have so far. So one very easy one to answer was just, does ThinkStep certify self-declared claims? We're not a certification organisation, so no, we can't do that. Also, self-declared claims are by nature made by you. We can provide review though, and so can other consultancies, if you want review or like a sounding board on those things. There was a question from Fiona that there was a list of the main sustainability certifications used in New Zealand on SBN's website, and just mentioning that for the group. So thank you, Fiona. There was another question from Lewis, which was, is there a collection and process for industrial composting in markets that Essity supplies? So over to Rochelle, perhaps.
Yeah, so that's been a journey of discovery for us as well, is around finding sites that will actually compost used hand towels. And it's really a site-by-site proposition. And really the best thing I would recommend is to speak to your waste provider to say that you want to compost your hand towels. Because some sites will take it and some sites won't. So so you need to kind of talk to your waste provider there. But another really good option, and it depends on your facility and what's available to you, is actually worm bins. So that's something that anyone can put on their own site, and you can mix food waste together with hand towel waste, napkin waste, paper, kitchen towel, all that sort of stuff. And actually in worm bins, it's quite beneficial to have those products in there and mix it in with your food waste. And the advice we have is that it's actually, you can really put up to 50% of those carbon-based tissue type products in with your food waste. So yeah, there's another option there with that too.
Thank you. Follow-up question from Andrew. How many consumers did you find which are actually composting their hand towels at home rather than landfilling? Do you know?
We have questioned this in black box campaign surveys. So again, it's obviously understanding what access people have. We did see some around about 30% at one stage. So again, people that are collecting it through a worm bin or home composting, and that is obviously extending at the moment with the curbside collection option of hand towel to be able to be collected. Obviously, if it's been used for food or food prep and the likes, or products that can be home composted, but we don't have clear percentage stats on that.
Thank you. And I guess for anyone in the Australian audience, in the New Zealand context, curbside, organic collection hasn't been common, but there are some cities like Christchurch has done it for quite a while, and then Auckland is increasingly doing curbside food waste, where I think you can put your hand towels in there, can't you, Anne? Is that right? You could, if you had a handy towel, yeah, perfect. There was a question specifically for you, Anne, which is, can you explain again a negative is a positive comment?
So what that is that, so understanding our whole life cycle. So on that slide that Rochelle opened with, we had the image on the toilet roll. So it's almost what we call from forest to flush across our whole life cycle, that we know from our cradle to gate, so from the forest to our store gate or to store, that we've actually got a negative carbon footprint. So we do have a very unique footprint in the fact with the local geothermal steam in our manufacturing process, and then using gold standard FSC pulp and the likes. So we're actually in a negative when it gets to store. It's once shoppers actually then start using product, that's when it alters the product's footprint. But like I mentioned, to say, hey, we've got a negative carbon footprint, people can't try and get their head around, is that a good thing or a bad thing? So hence we did call out low carbon footprint, and then we substantiate that low carbon footprint with further back-of-pack verification, saying the why. So it's across the manufacturing life cycle from forest to store, or the fact that we use local geothermal steam in the paper making process. So that's helping verify the why, and then we can back up with more information on our EPD on our website if people want to search further.
And I think, Anne, that actually neatly links to another question, which is from Sahar, just asking, is low carbon footprint, is that not vague in and of itself? And, do you need to substantiate it? And I think that comment you've made is you're substantiating it through the EPD, which you can provide, reference to on pack, but probably you wouldn't want to go into all the detail of an EPD. If anyone's ever opened an environmental product declaration, they're quite long and technical. There's no way you could put that on a kind of customer facing piece of marketing.
And that's more, from a front of pack point of view too, to then verify further on back of pack.
Brilliant. Another question for you, Anne, this is from Helen. Has the claim of post-consumer recycled content addressed consumer concerns about plastic, or do they still prefer paper regardless of its carbon footprint?
We do still get a few of those consumers actually contacting our consumer care line saying, hey, can you still think about this? I don't really want to buy you again until you're in paper. And we do have a great response. We can say, we totally understand your concerns, but through our science-led data, we've got verification to back up that this is the correct direction. And we do explain the whole reducing the footprint with this option, and the fact that because in New Zealand we've got the soft plastics recycling scheme that's available for over 80% of New Zealanders, and there is courier bags that can be used for those in locations that can't collect and store, that's actually really driving that circularity and really the best option because it can be recycled again into future uses.
Wonderful.
So I guess, yes, it is addressing the concerns. We still get those few outliers. And sorry, actually, just to back up too, we do ask that question when we sample again on black box campaigns, and we do find that people have answered, yes, that is actually a step in the right direction.
That's great to hear. I mean, I think for the plastic concern, for me at least, is always coming from a slightly different place, right? People aren't necessarily concerned about carbon footprint or climate change. They're more concerned about plastics in the environment. I guess the point that I would typically make is just that for me, plastic can be a problem, but the attributes that make plastic what it is are also the things that we want, right? So it's water resistant. You've got a paper product, you're trying to protect it from water. If you package it in paper, unless you had a plastic coating, then it wouldn't be water resistant anymore. So, you know, there's obviously benefits of having the plastic there. I think the key thing for me, at least, is what is the risk that it might end up in the environment? And so the advice that I would normally give to companies is to consider what the risk of the product is. So if it's a, you know, consumer-facing product, single use, use it on the go, use it when you're out in the park. It's like a little, you know, juice bottle or a sachet of something that you're going to take out and about. The risk of that's far higher than a bulk pack product that you're going to take home and then you're going to be forced to dispose of in the home or office. In that context, you know, you're taking the packaging off and you're faced with a choice. Do you put it in a landfill or do you recycle it? But either way, it's, in my opinion, contained and out of the environment. I think that's the most important kind of point regarding the risk of plastics in the environment, at least from my perspective. How do you realign the public view of what they think is sustainable with what you've measured from life cycle assessment as what needs to be improved to achieve more sustainable outcomes? So is there a divergence there between what the public thinks and what you measure, and how do you realign those two things?
Maybe start off if you like. I think the only answer to that is education. We're quite fortunate in the B2B space that we can have one-on-one conversations with customers to talk about the facts and the data. But yeah, that's the only way that you can change people's thoughts and opinions is with, you know, true information and education.
Perfect. And I might just ask two more questions cheekily and then we'll wrap up. So one from Hayley, wondering what your next sustainability goals are to keep moving forward.
We've got global goals in Essity. So we've got targets around carbon footprint reduction and waste out of landfill. You know, we've got a whole range of targets, which you can see on our website. But one of the next big changes that we've got locally is at our Carra mill in New Zealand. So we have paper machines there, which are very energy intensive. And we use gas there to dry and part of the paper making process. And I think it's a $15 million investment, if I can remember correctly, that's coming into play at the end of next year, and that will have a 23% carbon footprint reduction for that Carra site. And if we take back to 2010, from 2010 to when we make that change, we'll have a 60% footprint reduction at our Carra manufacturing site. So we're pretty proud of all the work we've been doing to reduce the carbon impact there in New Zealand with our tissue products.
That's a fantastic achievement. There were a couple of questions that were related to how much does all of this cost? How long does it take? It will cost tens of thousands of dollars and take a minimum of 6 months, possibly longer, often longer. And so it's not particularly cheap. There were comments made and questions raised about what do SMEs do, but I might just finish with one that I think I can address to Essity related to this, which is there's obviously a lot of cost in establishing an embedded process for life cycle assessment, environmental product declarations and measurement. What advice do you have or could you offer to startups who are trying to make a mark in this space? So smaller businesses who want to try and get on this journey. I guess it's a question that comes up a lot, and maybe I also need to think about what the best answer is. But I guess there are a couple of different answers that we often give. And so one is that if you're a smaller company involved in a large established industry, then what we'd recommend is working with your industry association. So you can do things at the association level to create tools that bring down the cost per member. So if you work through your association, you could build a life cycle assessment calculator, a standard set of rules, and then each member can just use it, you know, and there might be a small fee associated with that depending on how the association works, but generally that's a way of sharing the cost because most of the cost is involved in developing something for the particular product category. So if you're doing tissue products, there's a set of costs associated with that. If it was in concrete or if it was t-shirts, you know, it'd be a very different supply chain, and there's a lot of different work that needs to go across that. And so at that category level within your association, I think there's a lot of work that can be done there, and you see certain industry associations that have already done that for their members, and I think that's a huge way forward. There were questions raised regarding novel products, and I think that's a lot harder. That's where some companies, they'll partner with universities, for example, to get them do the research for them, because they've often got embedded life cycle assessment programs. Building calculated tools so you can account for the variables. So you'd say, like in the case of pulp and paper, for example, one of the big variations, as you know all too well, is what is the energy mix that you're using to produce something. And so you could just make that a variable. I think the key thing is understanding the supply chain, and just the supply chains are very, very different from one industry to another. Tissue products and paper are absolutely nothing like a smartphone, for example. There's no similarity at all in the supply chains, apart from the fact that a smartphone might be delivered in a cardboard box. That's probably where the similarities end. And so if we can contain the problem and say this is the industry, then we can build a tool that has still variables that you can control. What is the energy mix, and what are the transport distances, and what does the recipe for the product look like, and what does our own emissions of production on our own site look like. But then you can at least constrain the problem a little bit. I think the problem that you've got is that if it's just open-ended, like, can you build me a simple tool that calculates the life cycle impacts of anything, then all I can really deliver to you is a blank piece of paper, because there's no boundaries. So in some ways you need to define boundaries. So to kind of come back to the question of what can we do to make it cheaper and faster, it's typically done on a industry by industry, product category by product category sense. You still need a tool because, as you mentioned, Rochelle, there's no such thing as average. And for some industries that there really is no such thing as average. And this is a good example. And we definitely see industries where the difference in carbon footprint between the best and worst performers, I've seen cases where it's more than 25 times. And in tissue, it can be 10 times. It's significant. The differences are very, very large. It's not just like 10%. So yeah, definitely need calculated tools. But I'm conscious that we've run well over time, and I do really appreciate. Thank you for everyone who's held on for these last few minutes. I'd like to wrap up by thanking our speakers, Rochelle Lake and Anne Lindsay from Essity. Thank you both so much for your time. And I'd like to give a little brief plug for our next webinar, if you're available to make it, which is how to make sustainability central to your business strategy, with Omexom, who are formerly Electrics, with Leslie Black and my wonderful colleague Martin Fryer. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for making the time out of your day, and thanks again to the Essity team for making time for this. So thanks all. Goodbye.